Hello and welcome to this talk. Before I begin, I would like to take a moment to go over trigger warnings, a note about language, and a note about spoilers. This talk will feature discussions of pregnancy, childbirth, miscarriage, stillbirth, violence against pregnant women, and the effects of racism on maternal mortality. I will not, however, be showing any images of gore or of birth trauma. I do my best throughout the talk to use inclusive language, but because all the pregnant characters discussed are women, I will on occasion refer to pregnant women. It is not my intent to obscure or alienate anyone's experience by this, but please do let me know later if you think I could handle this at all better. Finally, this talk will feature spoilers for Sky Atlantic's Domina, Starz Spartacus, HBO's Rome, and Netflix's Barbarians. With these points covered, I'd like to begin my talk with a review of Domina so that you can know what you're in for. This utterly serious and delightful review comes from The Spectator. The reviewer argues that Domina is, quote, the latest proof that Western civilization is over. His reasons are as follows. Quote, instead of viewing these events from Augustus' perspective, we instead see them from the perspective of his wife, Livia Drusilla. I found myself particularly irritated by the seemingly endless childbirth scenes. Did the writers think the female perspective required them to include fewer battles and more scenes of screeching women writhing in agony than looking aghast at the invariably stillborn bundle? Certainly, speaking as a chap, even a little of the stuff goes a very long way. But do even women viewers like being put through all this trauma? Based on this and similar reviews, you might conclude that pregnancy has never been depicted on a show about the ancient Mediterranean. But in fact, it's quite a common trope. Before I get to discussing Domina itself then, I'd like to take a moment to talk about how pregnancy has commonly been screened on shows about this period in empire up until now. First, a quote from the showrunner of Starz Spartacus. Quote, and I was actually adamant, no, Lucretia had to die. It wouldn't work any other way. So graciously, everyone said, okay, you know what you're doing. And then I had this idea about Mad Lucretia, a take on Mad Ophelia. And I thought at the time, wouldn't it be great if Ilitia is pregnant and Lucretia, criminally insane at this point, has designs on her child, end quote. This quote is horrifying, but it's also a phenomenally revealing look at how pregnancy is commonly conceptualized on shows like the ancient Mediterranean. Pregnancy is a plot mechanic. Pregnancy is a way to produce a child that, in this case, showcases the madness of another woman. Pregnancy is something that invites violence onto the pregnant body. Not one, but two season finales on Spartacus will end up centering graphic violence onto the pregnant character. The first, when Lucretia herself is stabbed in the belly by the male slave she's been raping throughout the season. And the second, when Lucretia cuts the fetus out of her friend and former lover's body. This conception of pregnancy as a plot mechanic that is simultaneously violent and elided is not confined to Spartacus. On Rome HBO, the show duly depicts Cleopatra having sex with Caesar and Pullo in order to conceive the son Caesarion, but then fast forwards a year, skipping any depiction of either visible pregnancy or childbirth. At the other end of the social scale, the Pullo's freedwoman wife Irene initially has her pregnancy played for laughs when she immediately mispronounces pregnant as pregnant. And you see on the left hand here, her wise Roman husband correcting her on how to name her pregnancy. She's later poisoned by another enslaved woman so that she violently miscarries and bleeds to death, so that the other woman can take her husband. This dynamic of violence and religion even extends to shows that aren't actually about Romans, such as Netflix's Barbarians. Dusnelda, the main female character, fights at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest while pregnant, but she displays none of the physical or mental signs of pregnancy, despite, again, fighting all day at one of the most brutal battles in Roman history. The only effect her pregnancy has on the show is so that Arminius, shown on the right here, can tenderly touch her stomach and face before the battle, while her ex-lover looks on in ominous jealousy from the shadows. On these shows, pregnancy is a means to an end. It's not worth depicting in its own physical, messy reality. Pregnant women, apparently, are not interesting unless they're being attacked and/or they're a source of angst for a man. Domina takes a different approach to this. This shot is one of my favorites from the show, and in a lot of ways could function as my thesis for this talk. On the left, we have Augustus Caesar. On the right, his best friend and second in command, Marcus Agrippa. They are discussing a plan that will get Caesar 10 more years of almost unlimited power. In the center, always between them, is Livia Drusilla, the architect of the plan, clad in blood red and roughly 5 months pregnant. In this talk, I will be arguing that the presentation of pregnancy on Domina is radical for 2 reasons: centrality and casualness. As the Spectator reviewer correctly notes, there are no major battles depicted on the show. Philippi we want to see the aftermath of. Actium is never mentioned at all. Never shown on screen at all. It's only mentioned twice. The few physical fights we do get are nasty and almost unclimatically short. The narrative weight of the show rests elsewhere. Across the first 4 episodes, we get 4 childbirth sequences and 1 miscarriage scene, instead of the reduction of childbirth to simplistic screeching and rioting. Each of these sequences is shot with the dramatic intensity and care usually reserved for climatic moments, such as Actium. Even more pervasively, we see the continual presence of pregnant women across these episodes as they scheme, have sex, travel, determine the fates of their families in Rome, and just happen to be pregnant at the same time. Narratively and visually, this constant interplay between centrality and casualness situates pregnancy as both a powerful political currency and a remarkably unremarkable part of life. My talk then will follow the following outline. I begin by analyzing one specific example of how the script weaves an explicit connection between imperial power and the pregnant, laboring bodies of the Principate's women. I follow this with an examination of how 2 specific staging cues further shore up this connection. I end this talk by discussing how Domina undercuts its own radical message through the starkly different treatment it grants the pregnancies of Antigone, a freedwoman played by a Black actress. The pregnancies on the show are all historically attested, at least those borne by the characters that appear in the historical record. I would like to examine, in the interest of time, one specific example of an incident that doesn't appear in the sources, except in the most fleeting terms possible. Suetonius records in his Life of Augustus that Livia had no children with Augustus, only a single premature stillbirth. Yet they remained married for 51 years until Augustus died. In a Rome obsessed with hairs, how is this possible? Domina makes that question the fulcrum on which its fourth episode turns. The episode opens with Livia struggling to deliver that stillborn child. She afterwards learns she will never be able to safely get pregnant again. Her reaction to this is to herself initiate divorce proceedings, acknowledging Augustus's need as princeps to have heirs. So far, very Roman. Livia being Livia, she instead turns these immense personal losses into a political tool. Before the divorce can be announced, she goes directly to Augustus's top general, Marcus Agrippa. In less than 5 minutes, she weaves a parallel between being replaced by a younger woman for her infertility and Agrippa's own fears about being replaced by the rising star of Marcellus, Augustus's nephew. Agrippa takes this parallel seriously enough that he ends up literally coming to blows with Augustus over it, during which he accuses, "I put you where you are, and Livia kept you there. You stayed in your tent at Philippi. You were too sick to fight at Actium." In other words, Livia's pregnant body is put on the same level of importance to state security as Philippi and Actium by the man who actually won Actium for Augustus. The episode ends with Livia back in Augustus's house, once more, literally at the center of empire, reclining between the two most powerful men of Rome. This shot is one of many throughout the show that consistently, both literally and metaphorically, centers pregnant bodies and pregnant knowledge. Out of these many possible instances, I have chosen to examine 2 in this talk. Firstly, the way that the teenage Livia realizes she is pregnant for a second time does not follow any usual scripts for this. Rather than being surprised by a period being late or being diagnosed by an older woman, Livia recognizes her own pregnancy when she wakes up, grabs her breasts, and realizes that they're sore. For the next 30 seconds, as Livia rages against the household gods, the show never explains why. We, the audience, either know based on our own read or lived experiences, or we don't. For that moment, anyone in the audience who has been pregnant has that little bit of an edge over anyone who hasn't. That knowledge, again, is replicated both in Livia and potentially in the audience. Secondly, the staging of Livia's final birth, the one that would lead to Agrippa's quarrel with Augustus and an ensuing political crisis in the Principate. All births on the show are communal affairs, with numerous helpers, friends, as has been common through most of pre-modern history. This birth is different because it's also public. Where the other births take place behind closed doors for as much privacy as you can get in a Roman house, this scene has Livia's bedroom door open as she labors. Not only do we see Julia, Augustus's daughter, watching her stepmother labor with horror, there are also men present. Iulus Antonius, Julia's eventual lover, is there to hold her hand. The freedman Tycho likewise comforts Livia's frightened son, Drusus. The presence of these men is framed as neither voyeuristic nor remarkable. Rather, they take for granted, like Agrippa, like Augustus, that pregnancy remains a central part of their political and emotional well-being, just as it is for women. This continual attention to framing makes the show's erasure of the one black pregnancy all the more troubling. The character Antigone is a freed woman a skilled midwife and herbalist, and Livia's oldest, most loyal companion. Like Livia, Antigone miscarries a deeply wanted child on the show. But the way the show treats these two experiences is almost literally worlds apart. As discussed earlier, Livia's stillbirth and Augustus's reaction to it becomes the cause of a major political rift. The narrative also grants large swaths of the episode to the personal ramifications of that loss. The first scene after the opening credits features the body of the stillborn infant being washed and prepared for burial by the household. We see numerous characters, including Augustus, Antigone herself, Antigone's freedman husband Tycho, Livia's son Drusus, the freedwoman Prima, Agrippa, Livia herself, explicitly grieve the child, and in the case of the other characters, comfort and support Livia. In contrast, Antigone's pregnancy is used only to move up Livia's plan to assassinate Marcellus, since she argues that by the time autumn arrives, Antigone will be too close to birth to help. Once the crisis has passed with Marcellus' successful death, the next episode reviews in a throwaway line that Antigone has miscarried. Antigone herself is not present for this revelation. She spends the episode isolated, with no one in her support system, and never speaks of or shows any sign of recovering from her physical ordeal. When she returns, she greets her husband by revealing that she is once again pregnant. No further mention is ever made of the miscarriage. Where Livia got an episode and more to process her grief surrounded by her community, Antigone gets no such space, no such support, and no such time on the show. Similarly, where Livia and the other white characters display competent knowledge of their own pregnant experiences, Antigone is given no such agency by the script or the director. This contrast is particularly horrifying because Antigone is actually the midwife attending all of Livia's births. In other words, her knowledge and experience is repeatedly foregrounded when it comes to supporting the white laboring body. But the show renders her silent when it comes to her own Black pregnant body. This, I think, is the major stumbling block that keeps the show's message from being as radical as it wants to be. Although I am not equipped to discuss this specific aspect with the depth that it deserves in the time that remains, I do see dominance marginalization of Antigone's pregnancies as a direct offshoot of prevailing paradigms about race and pregnancy and pain, which has resulted in a catastrophic crisis of Black maternal mortality on both sides of the Atlantic. I was honestly not sure how to conclude after that note. I do still believe that dominance handling of white pregnancies is at the vanguard of television dramas today, but there is still nothing revolutionary about the way the show both exploits and marginalizes the Black maternal experience. As I write and record this, the United States Supreme Court is debating the autonomy of pregnant people across the nation. While Domina may not quite herald the fall of Western civilization, I do still think that, particularly today, the way it both surpasses and reifies discourses about pregnancy, power, and lived experiences, both in the realm of the imagination and both in the realm on our screens, remains worthy of further study. Thank you for your time.